Hi everyone, welcome to this Roblox Studio tutorial. Today we're going to learn about variables, what they are and how to use them and why they're important in scripting. When I first started out, it was hard to comprehend why you would ever need to use these variables. They seemed a bit pointless to me. Um, and for some of you, you might have the same problem, but I will try to explain why they're so why they're so important in scripting. So variables are like containers that store information. Think of them as labeled boxes where you can put things like numbers, text, or even objects in your Explorer. So if I had a remote event in replicated storage or a part in the workspace, I could access that for a variable, so I wouldn't keep having to navigate to, let's say, the base plate. So instead of every single time going to workspace.baseplate, I would do local baseplate equals workspace.baseplate. So now this might seem like, oh, but what's the big deal? It's just one more word that I would have to do and a dot to access that. But when it comes to other things or storing informations, it's not as easy, and you might want to have variables that which the information in it changes during when you do things or whatever, and then you can't avoid using variables. So in Roblox Studio, variables are used to store data that your game can use later. For example, you might use a variable to keep track of a player's score, health, or sometimes even their username or just their character. So one example would be if you're storing a player's score. So you might be able to see how this is. You might be able to understand why this wouldn't work now, because if I only have 100 and then I'm gonna make a script where I want to increase the score, then if I didn't have to have this variable, then it wouldn't work. I wouldn't be able to increase the player score at all. So I'm just gonna write a quick example here. And this is also a cool thing about printing. You can put a comma there and then do this, but you want to put a space there so it's formatted correctly. You can put a comma here and then name a variable or basically anything. So workspace works too. Just it's just gonna print the this, so it's gonna print what this variable has, this variable's data. So if I open the output first, that would be great. If I now run the code, it's going to say that the player score is 0. In this example, we've created a variable. So, just to recap, in this example, we've created a variable called player score and set it to 0. And when we print it, the output window shows 0. So that's very simple. So the reason this variable would be important is, let's say, if I wanted the player score to increase every single second they've been in the server, then I would need to do something like that. And if without the variable that I can increase constantly, this would be quite impossible. First of all, because I could do this, so player score, and then do yeah, it's just not possible without a variable, because I need to have some kind of data stored. Because even if I do this, then it doesn't work. You need some kind of store, some kind of data stored somewhere. Even if I do 0 plus 1 right here, that wouldn't work because it's always just gonna be, alright, whatever. I'm getting errors, but this would print. Oh, it's because I forgot the comma. This is gonna print 1 every single time because I haven't stored this anywhere. There needs to be somewhere for this data to be stored. There's also some different types of variables. So we're gonna have a couple examples. So there's numbers, like I've already shown you. It can be a number value or a int value. I don't really know the difference between those, if I'm gonna be honest. So number value would be this basically, local health equals 100. You can also do strings, so let's say like local player name equals Robloxian 123. And then there's booleans, which is something like this. So let's say if you wanted to check if a cooldown, you want to have a cooldown for an ability, then it can be false from the beginning, obviously. Then you would also need something like this, and it's true or false. That's what a boolean value is. It's basically it's just true or false. And this would be, so a use for this would be if you want to have a cooldown on your ability, that is, you could like, you use the ability. So let me just write some like pseudocode. So use ability. So maybe just make a function. So yeah, like that. I mean, this isn't pseudocode right now. I was lying. But so for this to be able to have a cooldown, you would have to make something like this. Like when the player uses ability, function usability, and the cooldown is set to true. Without a variable that can store if there's a cooldown on it or not, that wouldn't work. You can also change. Obviously, you can change it. I just showed you right here that you can change variables anywhere in the code. And you might be wondering why it's local here. What that means is that it's local for like this area of the code. So since this is written in like the first bracket or whatever, I think this is called brackets, then it's gonna be available for the whole script. So it's basically a global variable for this script, right? But if I were to do local cooldown in here, since it's only for this function, this is a variable, and I go here, then it suddenly doesn't know what I mean when I do cooldown equals to true. I mean false, because now it works either way, because it thinks this is a variable in its own. Like it thinks it's this also thinks it's a variable. But if I was gonna do like local function is cooldown or whatever, then if I do if cooldown, so if cooldown equals true, then you see here it doesn't know what it is. But if I put it right here, then it knows because it's a global variable for the script. That's the simplest way I can put that. I mean, explain that. So when you're coding, you wanna give your variables a good names. So you can do, this is a good example. So local player score equals 100, and local game local, let's just do cooldown equals true. This is a good example because it's easy to read, right? And maybe if you get help with your coding, it's gonna be a lot easier to track. A bad example would be just to do local poop ball equals 100 and local monster equals to true, and in reality you mean the cooldown and the player score. It's just much more clear this way. And this is basically it for variables. You know, like most of the things that's possible. One more thing I'm gonna show you is what variables are usually used for. It's like you can get services. So instead of having to go every single time, like if let me think of an example real quick. So instead of every single time in the code, if you wanna get let's say if you wanna get all the players in the game, instead of every single time going local players equals, oh wait, well that's the right way to do it, but Well, it's just like, so instead of having to go get a game service every single time, what people usually do is they go replicated storage. Oh yeah, wait, I just figured out. So instead of going like this every single time, let's say you wanna make a variable for the tool you have inside replicated storage. Instead of doing local tool equals game get service replicated storage, this is a much better way than just going dot, by the way, because it's this will work even if the game hasn't really loaded yet, because it's gonna wait for the service, or at least, yeah. So it's gonna returns the service with the requested class name, creating it if it doesn't exist. So if you do this, and there's a slight delay in the replicated storage loading, you will get an error. But if you do this, it will create it if it doesn't already exist. Dot tool. And then let's say you have another tool, tool 2, in game get service. You see how this is very repetitive? Instead, you can do this. Local replicated storage equals game get service replicated storage. And then all you have to do is not return replicated storage tool. Very simple, right? That's all the examples I can think of. You can, so that also explains this thing. So you can make variables for things in the game that you might want to access. So instead of having to do replicated storage of tool all the time now, you can just do tool.parent equals workspace. It's just a lot more simpler. It's a lot better. It's gonna make your code look more professional and more cleaner by doing this. And it's also very, very, very important. So it's a very good idea to get this into practice as fast as possible. When I first started, instead of having values, I would use parts. So instead of having local has axe or checking the player's backpack for an axe, I make a part called has axe and set the transparency of it. So instead of going if has axe, because I have a variable, I do if axe part dot transparency is equal to 1. Then I do something like that instead. And that's also like why variables are important, so you don't end up like doing things like that, which is a very bad way of like, it's very bad to be doing something like that, like I did in the start, instead of doing this, because it's just a bad way to do it. I mean, it works, but it's not good practice. And that's it. You now know the basics of variables in Roblox Studio. Variables are essential for storing and managing data in your games. Practice using them in your scripts, and you'll get the hang of them very fast. It's not very hard to get your mind around. I'm gonna upload another video about something a little bit more complex than variables next time. But I hope you learned something, and I hope you understood. See you later.